We continue Caius Marius from Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. In the last, especially, he contracted a great deal of hatred by committing several gross misdemeanors in compliance with the desires of Saturninus, among which was the murder of Nonius, whom Saturninus slew because he stood in competition with him for the tribuneship, and when afterwards Saturninus, on becoming tribune, brought forward his law for the division of lands, with a clause enacting that the Senate publicly swear to confirm whatever the people should vote, and not to oppose them in anything, Marius in the Senate cunningly feigned to be against this provision, and said that he would not take such an oath, nor would any man, he thought, who was wise, for if there were no ill design in the law, still it would be an affront to the Senate to be compelled to give the approbation, and not to do it willingly, and upon persuasion. This he said, not that it was agreeable to his own sentiments, but that he might entrap Metellus beyond any possibility of escape, for Marius, in whose ideas virtue and capacity consisted, largely in deceit, made little account of what he had openly professed to the Senate, and, knowing that Metellus was one of a fixed resolution, as Pindar has it, esteemed truth the first principle of heroic virtue, he hoped to ensnare him into a declaration before the Senate, and on his refusing, as he was sure to do afterwards, to take the oath, he expected to bring him into such odium with the people as such should never be wiped off. The design succeeded to his wish. As soon as Metellus had declared that he would not swear to it, the Senate adjourned. A few days after, on Saturninus citing the senators to make their appearance and take the oath before the people, Marius stepped forth amidst a profound silence, everyone being intent to hear him, and, bidding farewell to those fine speeches he had before made in the Senate, said that his back was not so broad that he should think himself bound, once for all, by any opinion once given on so important a matter. He would willingly swear and submit to the law, if so be it were one proviso, which he added as a mere cover for his effrontery. The people, in great joy at taking the oath, loudly clapped and applauded him, while the nobility stood by ashamed and vexed at his inconsistency, but they submitted out of fear of the people, and, all in order, took the oath, till it came to Metellus' turn. But he, though his friends begged and entreated him to take it, and not plunge himself irrecoverably to the penalties which Saturninus had provided for those that should refuse it, would not flinch from his resolution, nor swear, but according to his fixed custom, being ready to suffer anything rather than do a base, unworthy action, he left the forum, telling those that were with him that to do wrong things is base, and to do well where there is no danger, common. The good man's characteristic is to do so where there is danger. Hereupon Saturninus put it to the vote, that the consuls should place Metellus under their interdict, and forbid him fire, water, and lodging. There were enough, too, of the basest of people ready to kill him. Nevertheless, when many of the better sort were extremely concerned and gathered about Metellus, he would not suffer them to raise a sedition upon his account, but with this calm reflection left the city. Either when the posture of affairs is mended and the people repent, I shall be recalled, or if things remain in their present condition, it will be best to be absent. But what great favor and honor Metellus received in his banishment, and in what manner he spent his time at Rhodes in philosophy, will be more fitly our subject when we write his life. Marius, in return for this piece of service, was forced to connive at Saturninus, now proceeding to the very height of insolence and violence, and was, without knowing it, the instrument of mischief beyond endurance, the only course of which was through outrages and massacres to tyranny and the subversion of the government, standing in some awe of the nobility and at the same time eager to court the commonalty. He was guilty of a most mean and dishonest action, when some of the great men came to him at night to stir him against Saturninus. At the other door, unknown to them, he let him in. Then, making the same pretense of some disorder of body to both, he ran from one party to the other, and staying at one time with them and another with him, he instigated and exasperated them one against another. At length, when the Senate and equestrian order concerted measures together, and openly manifested their resentment, he did bring his soldiers into the forum, and driving the insurgents into the capital, and then cutting off the conduits, forced them to surrender by want of water. They, in this distress, addressing themselves to him, surrendered. It is termed on the public faith. He did his utmost to save their lives, but so wholly in vain that when they came down into the forum, they were all basely murdered. Thus, he had made himself equally odious both to the nobility and commons, and when the time was come to great censures, though he was the most obvious man, yet he did not petition for it, but fearing the disgrace of being repulsed, permitted others, his inferiors, to be elected, though he pleased himself by giving out that he was not willing to disoblige too many by undertaking a severe inspection into their lives and conduct. There was now an edict preferring to recall Metellus from banishment, and this he vigorously, but in vain, opposed both by word and deed, and was at length obliged to desist. The people unanimously voted for it, and he, not able to endure the sight of Metellus' return, made a voyage to Cappadocia, and Galatia, giving out that he had to perform the sacrifices which he vowed to Cybele, but actuated really by other less apparent reasons, for in fact, being a man altogether ignorant of civil life and ordinary politics, he received all his advancement from the war, and supposing his power and glory would by little and little decrease by his lying quietly out of action, he was eager by every means to excite some new commotions, and hoped that by setting at variance some of the kings, and by exasperating Mithridates especially, who was then apparently making preparations for war, he himself should be chosen general against him, and so furnish the city with new manner of triumph. and his own house, with the plunder of Pontus, and the riches of its king. Therefore, though Mithridates entertained him with all imaginable attention and respect, yet he was not at all wrought upon or softened by it, but said, O king, either endeavor to be stronger than the Romans, or else quietly submit to their commands, but which he left Mithridates, as he intended, had often heard the fame of the bold speaking of the Romans, but now for the first time experienced it. When Marius returned again to Rome, he built a house close by the Forum, either as he himself gave out that he was not willing his clients should be tried with going far, or that he imagined distance was the reason why more did not come. This, however, was not so. The real reason was that, being inferior to others in agreeableness of conversation and the arts of political life, like a mere tool and implement of war, he was thrown aside in time of peace. Amongst all those whose brightness eclipsed his glory, he was most incensed against Sulla, who had owed his rise to the hatred which the nobility bore Marius, and had made his disagreement with him the one principle of his political life. When Bocchus, king of Numidia, who was styled the associate of the Romans, dedicated some figures of victory in the capital, and with them a representation in gold of himself delivering Jugurtha to Sulla, Marius upon this was almost distracted with rage and ambition, as though Sulla had arrogated this honor to himself, and endeavored forcibly to pull down these presents. Sulla, on the other side, as vigorously resisted him, but the social war, then on a sudden threatening the city, put a stop to this sedition, when just ready to break out. For the most warlike and best peopled countries of all Italy formed a confederacy together against Rome, and were within a little of subverting the empire, as they were indeed strong, not only in their weapons and valor of their soldiers, but stood nearly upon equal terms with the Romans as to the skill and daring of their commanders. Now, isn't there a better way to say that you've worthily joined the company of such and such spiritual entities that people worship? That's a bit better than, putting statues of yourself in a temple. As much glory and power as this war, so various in its events, and so uncertain as to its success, confirmed upon Sulla, so much it took away from Marius, who was thought tardy, unenterprising, and timid, whether it were that his age was now quenching his former heat and vigor, for he was above 65 years old, or that having, as he himself said, some distemper that affected his muscles and his body, being unfit for action, he did service above his strength, yet for all this he came off victor in a considerable battle, wherein he slew 6,000 of the enemies, and never once gave them any advantage over him, and when he was surrounded by the works of the enemy, he contained himself, as though insulted over and challenged, did not yield to the provocation. The story is told that when Publius Silo, a man of the greatest repute and authority among the enemies, said to him, If you are indeed a great general, Marius, leave your camp and fight a battle, he replied, If you are one, make me do so. Another time, when the enemy gave them a good opportunity of a battle, and the Romans, through fear, durst not charge, so that both parties retreated, he called an assembly of his soldiers and said, It is no small question whether I should call the enemies or you greater cowards, for neither did they dare to face your backs, nor you to confront theirs. At length, professing to be worn out with the infirmity of the body, he laid down his command. Now, it's not cowardice to just not rush into battle. Choosing this battle, do I take part in it or not? Just because some fight's available doesn't mean it's, bravery's determined whether or not you're joining it. And if everybody says, you've got to join it, it's like, then it's braver not to go with the crowd, right? Afterwards, when the Italians were worsted, there were several candidates suing with the aid of the popular leaders for the chief command in the war, with Mithridates. Sulpicius, tribune of the people, a bold and confident man, contrary to everybody's expectation, brought forward Marius and proposed him as proconsul and general in that war. The people were divided. Some were on Marius' side, others voted for Sulla, and jeeringly bade Marius go to the baths at Baia to cure his body, worn out, as he himself confessed, with age and catarrhs. Marius had indeed there, about Misenum, a villa more effeminately and luxuriously furnished than seemed to become one that had seen service in so many and great wars and expeditions. This same house Cornelia bought for 75,000 drachmas, and not long after Lucullus for 2,500,000. So rapid and great was the growth of Roman sumptuosity. And it's also kind of, if you're not able to properly go to war, you can take other people down with it, and honestly, you're just being, if you're not being helpful, you're just being stupid, right? Same thing with political leaders. If they're not mentally, morally, and physically qualified for their to be in their position, they're being stupid at best, right? Yet, in spite of all this, out of a mere boyish passion for distinction, affecting to shake off his age and weakness, he went down daily to the Campus Martius, and exercising himself with the youth, showed himself still nimble in his armor, and expert in riding, though he was undoubtedly grown bulky in his old age, and inclining to excessive faintness and corpulency. Some people were pleased with this, and went continually to see him, competing and displaying himself in these exercises. But the better sort that saw him pitied the cupidity and ambition that made one who had risen from utter poverty to extreme wealth, and out of nothing into greatness, unwilling to admit any limit to his high fortune, are to be content with being admired, and quietly enjoying what he had already got. Why, as if he were still indigent. If he were still indigent, should he, at so great an age, leave his glory and his triumphs to go into Cappadocia and the Euxine Sea, to fight Archelaus and Neoptolemus, Mithridates' generals? Marius's pretenses for this action of his seemed very ridiculous, but he said he wanted to go and teach his son to be a general. The condition of the city, which had long been unsound and diseased, became hopeless now that Marius found so opportune an instrument for the public destruction as Sulpicius's insolence. This man professed in all other respects to admire and imitate Saturninus. Only he found fault with him for backwardness and want of spirit in his designs. He therefore, to avoid this fault, got 600 of the equestrian order about him as his guard, whom he named anti-senators, and with these confederates he set upon the consuls, whilst they were at the assembly, and took the son of one of them who fled from the forum and slew him. Sulla, being hotly pursued, took refuge in Marius's house, which none could suspect, by that means escaping those that sought him, who hastily passed by there, and it is said was safely conveyed by Marius himself out at the other door, and came to the camp. Yet Sulla, in his memoirs, positively denies that he fled to Marius, saying he was carried thither to consult upon the matters to which Sulpicius would have forced him against his will to consent, that he, surrounding him with drawn swords, hurried him to Marius, and constrained him thus, till he went thence to the forum and removed, as they required him to do, the interdict on business. Sulpicius, having thus obtained the mastery, decreed the command of the army to Marius, who proceeded to make preparations for his march, and sent 2 tribunes to receive the charge of the army from Sulla. Sulla hereupon, exasperating his soldiers, who were about 35,000 full-armed men, led them towards Rome, first falling upon the tribunes Marius had sent. They slew them, Marius having done as much for several of Sulla's friends in Rome, and now offering their freedom to the slaves on condition of their assistance in the war, of whom, however, they say there were but 3 who accepted his proposal. For some small time he made head against Sulla's assault, but was soon overpowered and fled. Those that were with him, as soon as he had escaped out of the city, were dispersed, and night coming on, he hastened to a country house of his, called Solanium. Hence he sent his son to some neighboring farms of his father-in-law, Caius, to provide necessaries. He went himself to Ostia, where his friend Marius had prepared him a ship, and hence, not staying for his son, he took with him his son-in-law Granius, and weighed anchor. Young Marius, coming to Caius's farms, made his preparations, and the day breaking was almost discovered by the enemy, for there came thither a party of horse that suspected some such matter, but the farm steward, foreseeing their approach, hid Marius in a cart full of beans, then, yoking in his team and driving toward the city, met those that were in search of him. Marius thus conveyed home to his wife, took with him some necessaries, and came at night to the seaside. Where going on board a ship that was bound for Africa, he went thither. Marius the father, when he had put to sea with the strong gale, passing along the coast of Italy, was in no small apprehension of one Geminius, a great man at Terracina, and his enemy, and therefore bade the seamen to hold off from that place. They were indeed willing to gratify him, but the wind now blowing in from the sea, and making the waves swell to a great height, they were afraid the ship would not be able to weather out the storm. And Marius too being indisposed and seasick, they made for the land, and not without some difficulty reached the shore near Circaeum. The storm now increasing, and the victuals failing, They left their ship and wandered up and down with any certain purpose, simply as in great distresses people shun the present as the greatest evil, and rely upon the hopes of uncertainties, for the land and sea were both equally unsafe for them. It was dangerous to meet with people, and it was no less so to meet with none on account of their want of necessaries. At length, though late, they lighted upon a few poor shepherds that had not anything to relieve them, but knowing Marius, advised him to depart as soon as might be, for they had seen a little beyond that place a party of horse that were gone in search of him. Finding himself in a great strait, especially because those that attended him were not able to go further, being spent with their long fasting for the present, he turned aside out of the road and hid himself in a thick wood, where he passed the night in great wretchedness. The next day, pinched with hunger, and willing to make use of the little strength he had, before it were all exhausted, he travelled by the seaside, encouraging his companions not to fall away from him before the fulfillment of his final hopes, for which, in reliance on some old predictions, he professed to be sustaining himself. For when he was yet but very young, he lived in the country. He caught in the skirt of his garment an eagle's nest, as it was falling, in which were 7 young ones, which his parents, seeing and much admiring, consulted the augurs about it. He told them that he should become the greatest man in the world, and that the fates had decreed he should 7 times be possessed of the supreme power and authority. Some are of opinion that this really happened to Marius, as we have related it. Others say that those who then and through the rest of his exile heard him tell these stories and believed him have merely repeated a story that is altogether fabulous, for an eagle never hatches more than 2, and even Masaas was deceived, who, speaking of the eagle, says that she lays 3 eggs, hatches 2, and rears 1. However this be, it is certain Marius, in his exile and in greatest extremities, would often say that he should attain a 7th consulship. When Marius and his company were now about 20 furlongs distant from Minturna, a city in Italy, they espied a troop of horse making up towards them with all speed, and by chance also at the same time 2 ships under sail. Accordingly they ran every one with what speed and strength they could to the sea, and plunging into it, swam to the ships. Those that were with Granius, reaching one of them, passed over to an island opposite called Anaria. Marius himself, whose body was heavy and unwieldy, was with great pains and difficulty kept above the water by 2 servants, and put into the other ship. The soldiers were by this time come to the seaside, and from thence called out to the seamen to put to shore, or else throw out Marius, who then they might go whither they would. Marius besought them with tears to the contrary, and the masters of the ship other frequent changes in a short space of time of their purpose, inclining first to one, then to the other side, resolved at length to answer the soldiers that they would not give up Marius. As soon as they had ridden off in a rage, the seamen, again changing their resolution, came to land, and casting anchor at the mouth of the river Liris, where it overflows and makes a marsh, they advised him to land, refresh himself on shore, and take some care of his discomposed body, till the wind came fairer, which, said they, will happen at such an hour, when the wind from the sea will calm, and that from the marshes rise. Marius, following their advice, did so, and when the seamen had set him on shore, he laid him down in an adjacent field, suspecting nothing less than what was to befall him. They As soon as they had got into the ship, weighed anchor and departed, as thinking it neither honorable to deliver Marius into the hands of those that sought him, nor safe to protect him. He thus, deserted by all, lay a good while silently on the shore. At length, collecting himself, he advanced with pain and difficulty, without any path, till, wading through deep bogs and ditches full of water and mud, he came upon the hut of an old man that worked in the fens, and, falling at his feet, besought him to assist and preserve one who, if he escaped the present danger, would make him returns beyond his expectation. The poor man, whether he had formerly known him, or were then moved with his superior aspect, told him that if he wanted only rest, his cottage would be convenient. But if he were flying from anybody's search, he would hide him in a more retired place. Marius desiring him to do so, he carried him into the fens, and bade him hide himself in a hollow place by the riverside, where he laid upon him a great many reeds and other things that were light, and would cover, but not oppress him. But within a very short time he was disturbed with the noise and tumult from the cottage, for Geminius had sent several from Terracina in pursuit of him, some of whom happening to come that way, frightened and threatened the old man for having entertained and hid an enemy of the Romans, whereupon Marius, arising and stripping himself, plunging into the puddle full of thick muddy water, and even there he could not escape their search, but was pulled out, covered with mire, and carried away naked to Minturna, and delivered to the magistrates, for there had been orders sent through all the towns to make public search for Marius, and if they found him, to kill him. However, the magistrates thought convenient to consider a little better of it first, and sent him prisoner to the house of one Fannia. And one of the things that these people can, that people can do with regard to all these oracles and all that stuff, is that, they kind of be twisted pretty much whatever direction one kind of wants them to twist.